Ladies and gentlemen, I want to give a very brief introduction basically to show you what the challenges are and why we talk about standards today. In principle, I don't have to remind you that the transport sector in the EU is a very strategic sector. It is fundamental to all economic activity, and basically transport costs are also an input factor to all products and services in the EU. The transport sector is also a very important component of the European economy, providing directly for some 10 million jobs and contributing some 5 to 7% of EU GDP. Needless to say that European companies are world leaders in infrastructure, in logistics, in manufacturing, and in transport equipment, and also traffic management system and so on. So this is clearly something that's a big contribution to the EU economy. But it's also a cornerstone of integration in the EU, underpinning the internal markets for goods, but also the rights of citizens to travel freely in the EU, and is thus also a backbone to EU competitiveness in a globalized world. But as important as the transport sector is, we also have to realize that there are growing concerns with growth in transport sector. Here you have some estimations by the European Commission how transport activity is well projected to develop between 1990 and 2050, and you can see that transport activities are basically will be twice as high as they were in 1990 by 2050, and this obviously brings a lot of problems and challenges. I mean, you know that basically there has been no structural change in the way we ship our goods and how people move. And basically this means that we're still highly dependent on oil and oil products. Greenhouse gas emissions are increasing. Transport is basically one of the few or the only sector where emissions are still increasing, totaling some 25% of EU greenhouse gas emissions nowadays. And of course, increasing transport also leads to increasing congestion. And to address these concerns, the European Commission in 2011 published a white paper on transport, as you may know. And the target there is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 60% in the year 2050 as compared to 1990. And they also have introduced an intermediate target to reach this event. So, you know, the ambitions are there, but how can we achieve that? And at CEPS we had a task force on transport and basically on the decarbonization of the transport sector, where we brought together representatives of institutions and industry and academia to discuss how the targets can be reached. And what you can see here is on the left side you have the reduction target. So basically the 60% white paper target compared to 1990 translates to a 70% reduction compared to the 2050 projections. So this is important to know. But as you can see here, about 2/3 of the envisaged reductions can actually be achieved by energy efficiency, by low carbon fuels, and by new engine technologies. As for the other third of the reductions, you know, there are, for example, increasing efficiency in the transport system as such. Eco-driving can play a role, and of course, a reduction in transport volume is also a possible way to reduce emissions, although this is very clearly stated by the white paper that this is not an option. However, there are possibilities. So together, basically, these three measures could contribute 1/3 to reaching the target, whereas really low carbon technologies and energy efficiency are the main driver of the decarbonization in the transport sector. So basically from all the technologies that we have as a choice to decarbonize the transport sector, basically the question is, do we want to pick a winner? Do we want to pick a technology today that we say in 2030 or 2050 could really help to decarbonize the transport sector? The conclusion we had in this task force at CEPS was to say that no, we probably should not let politicians pick winners, but let the market pick the winners. And this means that we need technology neutral approach. And standards are seen as a key element of such a technology-neutral policy approach. We have seen that standards work. Here we have, you see the situations for nitrogen oxide emissions and for particles, and with increasingly tightening standards, basically those emissions could be reduced by over 90% over the last 20 years or so. Now I understand if you think that NOx and particles are not the same as CO2. That's right. One of them are kind of end of pipe technologies that you can use. For CO2 it's very different. So technically there is a difference, but politically speaking, there's actually no difference if cost-effective technologies exist to reduce CO2 emissions. And in that sense, standards drive higher efficiency in the internal combustion engine, but they also speed up the development of new low-carbon technologies and fuels. So to conclude, and then to also start with the speakers, we think that a technology-neutral approach is the right way forward, not to pick winners today. And this means that emission standards should be the key element of a transport policy in Europe and reinforced by other measures. But this, I think, is the key message I want to make.